Okay then, so it's time to talk about statistics in Warlords of Draenor. So, a few things have happened with the secondary stats and the tertiary stats, and, I felt that these are perhaps going to be rather problematic for quite a while, but I've just decided that it is now the time to make the video on it. I was going to do some stuff in the beta for tomorrow's video, today's video, but as it turned out, the beta went down for maintenance, so that's why you're getting this video. So then, topic number one is that there may be too many stats. Look, they're adding so many secondaries, and then they're also adding these minor stats. It just feels like it's a bit inconsistent. They removed hidden expertise and reforging and things like that because they wanted gear to be a little bit more simple and readable. However, now they're adding multi-strike versatility, bonus armor, spirit, movement speed, indestructible leech, and avoidance to gear. So they took two things away and they added 8. They added 8. Now, of course, bonus armor is a tank only thing, spirit's a healer only thing, but do you get what I mean? I just think that it's not really going to accomplish their goal of making gear just be a little bit more kind of readable and easy. So there. Now, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, however, I can imagine that if you have so many variables like this, it's just going to make it really annoying to work out what's actually good for your class. Now, I'm going to dive in to a little bit more depth here about the secondary stats and how I feel that the Warlords ones are actually really boring in comparison to the traditional RPG stats. So then, multi-strike is basically just something that gives you a chance to proc an ability again. That sounds really weird, but say I do kill shot, right? I would have, let's just say, depending on the amount of multi-strike I had, I could have maybe a 10% chance for my kill shot to proc a multi-strike, which would basically just automatically fire off a second kill shot that did 30% damage. Now, this wouldn't really work with anything like, say, I think one of the examples I said was like a priest getting additional shadow orbs. Things like that wouldn't happen, it would just be the damage component of a spell. Now that sounds interesting, right? The idea of, so I can do my my kill command and maybe it can proc twice and, the second one could be 30% damage. That's really cool. It's not. It is not. This is such a boring stat. I don't know what it's going to be like from a maths perspective and how it's going to interact with some classes more or less underneath the hood. But what I can say is that this is a really boring stat. It does not affect your gameplay whatsoever. It just means slightly more numbers pop up on your screen, but there's no gameplay effect. It's very dull, basically. Look, it's just a boring thing. It's just more numbers you don't care about. I just think it's a little bit flawed in that perspective. I mean, sure, the idea of being able to proc additional, charge or, like additional shots of your attack, like that's a cool idea, yes, but in practice, it just doesn't translate into any interesting gameplay at all. Now, speaking of something being extremely boring, we now have versatility. This is just a flat increase to your stats. So here's an example. 1% versatility will give you that's 1% versatility, not versatility rating. You've got to remember the difference between rating and your actual end effect. But 1% versatility would give you a 1% increase to damage, healing, absorbs, and it would reduce the amount of damage you take by 0.5%. Now, this isn't going to be itemized or, mathed up so that it's the absolute best secondary stat. It's just there so that it's always something that's useful that you're not going to fail if you put stats into. But here's the thing, it's boring once again. It's a flat number increase. It's like one of those old talents that was, click this to get 1% more damage to this. It's very boring. This is a common theme. It doesn't do anything at all. It just makes you better by flat number, which is dull. Now, I'm going to go and compare these to the secondary stats that we have at the minute, so I can explain why I think that they are a bit more interesting. Okay, so there's that. Now, next, bonus armor is just more armor. Whatever, I think that's fine. It fits with the lore of tanks. It makes sense. Fair enough. I'm okay with bonus armor. And I actually think that spirit as a secondary stat that's for healers only is really cool. Now, of course, as you know, spirit is currently in the game. And what's great about spirit is that it increases the amount of resources that you have to play around with. That actually has a perceivable effect on your gameplay. You'll very much know the difference between playing a healer with a lot of spirit versus a healer with not that much spirit. Basically, the more that you get Spirit, or maybe the more you build your character into Spirit, then your class will feel a little bit different. Let's talk about another one of the older secondary stats, Haste. So the more haste you have, the more damage, or not the more damage, sorry, the more things you do per second. It really does speed up your gameplay. And on some classes, like say, I don't know, my Ret Paladin and my Arcane Mage, I feel that when I have more haste, there's a really noticeable effect. On the Arcane Mage, I'm building up my arcane charges faster, and it just feels like a spec that's really flowing very quickly. On my Paladin, it feels like I'm mashing buttons and whacking the crap out of things. Once again, like with Spirit, the more haste you have, the more things you do per second. That's a really interesting design. Well, not interesting, I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's a really good design. It's something that people understand. It's simple. It's not being too ambitious or crazy. It's just something that works. And that's good, that speaks to people. When you want a statistic, you want something that, you can put onto gear that makes sense, but that also is just easily understandable and has a perceivable effect on your gameplay. Multi-strike and versatility do not do that at all. Let's move on to another one, crit. Well, you may say, okay, crit's just a flat number increase thingy. Well, first of all, it's crit chance. So there's a little bit of RNG in there to keep things spiced up, but ultimately, people love crits. They love seeing a big meaty number appear, and a big meaty number. Yep, that's maybe something people can take out of context in the comments. Thank you. Anyway, yes, you get a big number on your screen more often. Crits have sometimes got a different sound effect and various things like that. It's really cool, and again, it's just one of those stats that works, that speaks to people. That makes sense. Let's move on to Mastery. So Mastery is honestly rather boring for some classes. However, depending on the classes or specs, whatever, like specific Mastery mechanic, things can actually be really interesting. So I'd say that the value of Mastery in terms of how fun it is really something that you need to evaluate on a class-by-class basis. So overall, what do I think about this secondary stat situation? Well, the new ones add lots of clutter, they add more numbers to balance, but they don't really offer much new gameplay whatsoever. That really does kind of suck. And I would imagine that Blizzard were maybe a little bit concerned that if all the gear is going to be is, well, Mastery, Crit, and Haste, that they're not going to have many options. And okay, maybe Spirit and Bonus Armor, maybe they wouldn't have as many options for what they put in gear drops. But I'd say that adding 2 boring options in is the lazy way of doing things, and it's not the most interesting way of doing things. Do I have a viable alternative to add more stats into the game? No, I don't. That's not what this video is trying to do. This video is just trying to highlight a problem. Maybe in the future, I will try to design my own solution. I obviously do know that it's far easier to nitpick problems than it is to design a solution, so I do respect that. Anyway, so in closing, they are essentially rather dull, they don't affect your gameplay, and that is a bit of a shitty design in my opinion. And because it adds more clutter, that's just going to muddy things up for players when it comes to gearing, and it's also going to make your gear less readable, which sucks. Okay, so that's the secondaries done. But guess what? Minor stats are not going to be spared my wrath either. Minor stats are strange. They are so strange, so I'll list them off here. You've got movement speed. It increases your movement speed. You've got indestructible, which causes an item to not take durability damage. And you also have leech, which will cause you to be healed for a portion of all damage and healing done. Then finally you have avoidance. This will reduce your damage taken from area of effect attacks. This is a very frustrating system to me. So movement speed is highly useful both in a PvP and a PvE context. Indestructible, however, is useless. I mean, you will be going to a vendor and repairing your gear anyway, so this is going to have little to no effect on your gameplay. Even if you have indestructible gear, you will still have to go to a repair vendor and repair things. So that sucks. Leech. Well, Leech is just very good. It's always a useful thing to have. Okay, it's going to vary on a fight-by-fight basis with how good it is, but once again, it's a good stat. Then Avoidance is also situationally rather useful. So you've got this weird thing where move speed's great for everyone, Indestructible's a wasted stat, Leech is good and Avoidance is sometimes good. Now honestly, all the people are going to want is move speed and Leech, because they are the solid things that are always very good. Now, from a rating perspective, just a rating perspective, I don't think that having stats with effects like running faster and lifesteal should be so RNG reliant. I don't think that's a very good thing. And Blizzard's response to people's concern here has been just to say, well, look, these are minor stats. They're so, well, I don't want to say they're so weak, but their effect is so minor that it doesn't really matter that they are behind RNG. Well, my response to that is that if your defense of a not particularly well thought out and polished system is that, well, it doesn't matter anyway, well, then it's just a bad system and it should be cut from the game. You know, you can't just say, listen, here's some cool little things, right? They're supposed to be fun and interesting. And, well, when someone says, listen, guys, there's actually some really big concerns here. Well, if their response is, well, it doesn't particularly matter, then honestly, are people going to care about getting it in the first place? If it is supposed to be some bonus reward, and then it's so weak that it apparently doesn't matter that much, well, you're not going to get anyone excited about the feature, are you? No, you're not. And someone's going to be very salty about spending their EPGP on a bit of gear that's got indestructible on it, I can tell you that much. The whole thing's just very problematic, and honestly, it does seem to be rather ill-conceived. I hope they have a look at this again, and really just take a long, hard think about it. Oh, and just one last thing. So, there's a lot of RNG going on. Obviously, these tertiary stats are all based on RNG, but also you can get additional gem slots through RNG, and you can get a Warforged bit of armor with a higher item level through RNG. Now, the good thing about this is that it is going to add a little bit more tail on your gear progression. You could probably gear up rather fast, but if you really wanted to have all the tertiary stats and all the gem slots, well, it's going to take you quite a while, so I guess there's maybe a little bit of a concern that that's just padding things out for too long. But I also just have got a bit of a problem where if you get lucky a few times, you're going to be really far ahead because you'll be rocking the Warforged stuff with the gem slots and the movement speed, and it just seems like they're locking a little bit too much behind Super RNG. I suppose a lot of people have said, hey, look, this is very Diablo-based. This is very Diablo-ish. Here's the thing about the Diablo stuff. You can farm a boss as many times as you want in Diablo. Whereas in Warcraft, you can farm a boss once a week. You can get a chance at that loot table once a week. Now, the fact that you can keep on doing a Diablo boss so many times mitigates the sort of OP-ness of a stat or something like that. Because it's something that you can probably get if you put in the time, and because it's such a single-player focused game, despite Blizzard's always online bollocks, and you know, that stuff's okay, but in a game that's competitive, that's about all your numbers and playing with other people, do you really think it's okay that just, you know, big old whack of RNG appears and, oh look, this person's now arbitrarily much better than the other person, despite the fact that they're both wearing the same base bit of gear? It just seems like there's too much RNG going on in the gearing process, and I can imagine it leading to a lot of very frustrated raiders. I know that I have been talking a lot about raiding in this video. Frankly, I don't know a great deal about tertiary stats and PvP, so I don't know if they're going to appear. I would imagine that they wouldn't though, because of the severe balance implications, and of course, since Conquest gear is usually purchased off a vendor, I'd imagine that your top end PvP gear will be free from all of this RNG bullshit. Okay then, well that's basically my 11 minutes soapbox over. What I want to know in the comments is, especially if you're a beta tester, what do you think of versatility and multi-strike? Have you actually found any interesting gameplay there? I haven't, but if you have, I would really like to hear about it. And this is just a second question that really goes out to everyone who's listening. Do you think that it makes sense having things like movement speed, life steal, and less damage from AoE being behind an RNG thingy? Do you think that's okay? I'm really not too sure if it is okay, honestly, and I think it could result in quite a few problems. Anyway, with all that stuff said, thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting, because I suppose it wasn't the most positive video, and I'll see you next time.